Welcome to The Path to Exit, a podcast to help software and internet founders understand the process to raise capital or sell their business.
Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Mike Lyon, founder and managing director at Vista Point Advisors, and this is The Path to Exit. This show is dedicated to helping founders of software and internet businesses understand what it takes to raise capital or sell their business and how to do it well. My guest today is Ardis Kadiu. Ardis is the founder and CEO of Element451, an ed tech company renowned for its AI-powered student engagement and CRM product. At Element451, Ardis has been instrumental in developing advanced personalization engines and AI features, demonstrating his deep understanding of AI's practical applications. We recently worked with Element451 to complete a large strategic investment from PSG aimed at positioning the company to meet the growing demand for AI-powered student engagement solutions in the higher education and other learning-based settings. In today's episode, we'll discuss how Ardis and Element451 went about integrating AI into their product, how it helped to accelerate growth, and how SaaS founders can think about integrating AI into their own solutions. Many founders in vertical SaaS are grappling with how to approach AI. Is AI a threat or an opportunity? And how should you think about the rapidly evolving landscape? Not everyone can or needs to build an LLM. Ardis, can you walk us through how you discovered the opportunity at Element451?
Hey, Mike, it's good to be on the podcast. First, we were focusing on the problem. And when we focused on the problem, we understood that we needed to do better optimization. As we were looking at the problem over many years, we solved it in different ways. We started with this idea of engagement and how can we replace a marketing agency and how can we put all of that workflow into software? And most vertical SaaS companies, that's exactly how they start. It's like, how do I take a manual process and workflow and build it into software? So we came up with different solutions. We built things that were better at the communication engine. We built things that were better at the engagement layer. We prepackaged stuff that an agency would do, like campaigns and things like that. And then when AI came around, or we were doing predictive modeling before, or the machine learning or predictive AI, but
not AI.
Right, exactly. The old AI. When generative AI came about, now you actually had the ability to create content and to create things without having a massive amount of people or creative folks actually contribute to that process. So we can now bake in a lot of that. And what we did is, because of these large language models were really good at producing or generating conversational stuff, it was really easy for us to start thinking, oh, engagement is all about this conversation. So we started building and incorporating that AI alongside our product. We didn't think about it as a new product, but we just thought, we have a workflow right now. Let's just add an AI component to that alongside. So either we can automate that process in the product itself, or we can essentially create a copilot that the user can interact with and can build that thing a lot faster than hitting buttons around.
I think that's an awesome use case, because I think if you read the media, everyone thinks every company that's using AI is brand new, raised $1 billion to go create a LLM. Whereas it sounds like your approach was you were building software pre-AI, if you will. Obviously, you were doing machine learning. And then as AI really started to accelerate, you were just able to take the good from the AI, integrate it into the workflows you had, make them better and lower cost. I think that's really interesting, and maybe not the way a lot of founders think about use cases for AI.
Yeah, the foundational model. So what's happening today with LLMs and these foundational models and the companies that are building it, obviously, one of the things that has been happening this past week is the introduction of DeepSeek, and essentially it's commoditizing model building. So there's a lot of memes out there today that talk about the AI wrappers are winning now. So before, last year or the year before, you had companies that were just building AI wrappers, and guess what? The value of those AI wrappers are delivering real business value or real use case rather than building foundational technology. And we're seeing that shift. As the foundational technology gets cheaper, it becomes commoditized, and then the big players are driving the price down. Who wins? The guys who are wrapping it up and then selling it to the end user.
Absolutely. The way I think about this is, obviously for a few months there, it seemed like everyone was going to build their own LLM, right? That seemed like the secret.
Yeah.
And then obviously it was really expensive to do that. So the theory was, okay, there's going to be a few winners and everyone will use them. Now that narrative's changed again, as you said. Now the cost to developing it's even lower. But I see this a little bit similar to the days when Amazon Web Services started. Everyone was afraid that AWS, the big gorilla, was going to take everyone's software. Instead, what they did is just made hosting really cost effective so that you as a founder didn't have to go build the server farm to run your SaaS product. And all that did is accelerate the SaaS ecosystem because now you could spend money on the product rather than hosting. And I see this in a very similar way that the workflows and the data you have are going to be the moat around which to build your business. And it's going to be
Exactly.
really hard for an AI only LLM to go compete with those workflows and understand the industry. Like the moats that you had before against competitors are still the moats that you have right now, I think, which is really interesting. Did you give any thought to building a LLM in the early days, or was that always a no-go for you?
Because we were so close to the research and we're looking at everything, we just realized early on that building LLMs was futile. We saw things like Bloomberg GPT. If you remember, that was a big story
Yeah.
where Bloomberg essentially built their own LLM and they spent a couple $100 million training it with their own proprietary data. And what ended up happening is that when GPT-4 came around and it was a generalized model, it was beating Bloomberg GPT. So at that point, I'm like, look, proprietary data doesn't matter. These things are reasoning engines, and it's going to be around the reasoning that you're going to plug it into different workflows. It's not necessarily the knowledge part that they hold that's going to be the value. The value is going to be how smart they are in reasoning about problems. And what we did is we focused tremendously on that data layer. And we said, that's our competitive advantage, right? These models, they're going to become really smart, and we need to give them context and we need to give them essentially the memory, right? If you think about the LLMs as the brain and the reasoning, you have to give them memory. Otherwise, they wake up, they're really smart like a little baby, but they're like very aware of everything. But they need to remember that all of these experiences, they don't need to touch the stove and they don't need to do that and that. That memory is essentially the moat or the competitive advantage that vertical SaaS and we felt like we had when coming in and saying, what's the best way to engage a student? And how do you think about it in higher education? What are some of the do's and don'ts? What are the ethical implications of that? Coming in from outside in, generalized models, they don't have that knowledge and they don't have that context. So we felt that was essentially the road for us to go in. And cost was a big part of it as well. It's just very costly to specialize in building LLM models. And it was just not even a question for us.
I think obviously a great call. And a lot of people fell into that trap, right? You just mentioned the Bloomberg example where they spent a ton of money and not necessarily good value there. I think what's really interesting I'm seeing with companies, like obviously we work with companies a little bit later stage than the early, heavily VC backed companies, but I'm seeing lots of businesses where they're now able to significantly improve the financial profile of their SaaS business. So maybe they had an element of their cost of goods sold that was pretty expensive, maybe 30% of revenue, which
Mhm.
really drives the gross margins down and make you think, is this a software business or not? With implementing AI, you can see the cost of goods sold shrink dramatically. And these are now much better businesses. Like we have a couple examples of clients we're working with right now where the margins have moved up 30, 40 points based on using AI to replace a human element. And they're now phenomenal businesses, whereas before they were
Right.
borderline software based on the gross margins. So I think really interesting. Obviously, you're in education, which can be sometimes a little bit stodgy from the customer base. How did you initially kind of frame AI? Obviously, there were some concerns I can imagine on some administrators' parts around how are we going to let this AI be involved with our students? How did you get people over that? How did you frame it? And was that actually a big impediment to the early days?
It was. We had to come out of the gate. And one of the things that we did really early on is decide that we're going to invest in education and literacy in the market. And we want to be the go to source to understand what these things are about. So we went really heavy on producing materials and content specifically for higher education. We put prompt engineering courses together. This is essentially getting people familiar in the AI space. So I had my prompt engineering course that thousands of people took. We had our AI guide for higher education, which was about 50 or 60 pages, and it was downloaded thousands of times. And we had webinars every so often. Like we had our first ChatGPT webinars and how to use these tools. We actually went out and bought a podcasting network called Enrollify because we thought that our best way to get to the audience and push our agenda was through media, right? It's through learning. So we did that and we've continued that over the past year. It's been really good for us, but we had to invest quite a bit in that education in the market. And the way we positioned it was, hey, this is a tool, just like any other tool. You're going to use it. Obviously, over the last year and what we see in 2025, we're seeing that transform from a tool to actually becoming a coworker. Last year, it was assistance. So 2023, we positioned it as a tool. Hey, here's Copilot. Here's our AI tools. 2024, it was like, here's our suite of AI assistants that are assisting you on all your jobs and how you can go about it. 2025 is about an AI team. So that's how we're positioning. It's about AI workforce, AI team. Of course, agentic AI is the big thing right now, but that's how it's evolved over the past 3 years for us in positioning it. Now, we're not getting the same questions that we were getting 2 years ago.
Sure.
Like, how can I trust this thing? It doesn't have my information. My information is wrong. I ask it a question.
Right.
How is it ethical? So all of those things that we were getting are no longer like copyright questions. We knew that they were going to go away, but it's just really hard to talk to somebody about value when it comes from a place of fear, right? It's like this thing is going to steal something from me, right? So yeah, it's changed drastically, to be honest, and it's changed really fast. It's the fastest that I've seen people change in terms of how they see a technology or how they see something in a long time. And of course, I didn't really grow up during the internet revolution in the 90s, but certainly in the 2000s with all the Web 2.0 stuff, that took a long time.
So it sounds like it changed even faster than you thought it would, right? Just given the timeline you walked through of
Yes.
how much things have changed year to year. Were there any of those product evolutions, like your growth rate obviously has been phenomenal. Any one of those product innovations that you think really led to the growth or just the general switch to AI in the product? Anything you'd call out in particular around driving growth?
I think the way we approached it and just incorporating as a team member or as part of the system so you can live alongside the product was really instrumental. I would say our AI assistants or AI copilots was instrumental and our AI chatbots with the students. So again, we go back to this assistant. So like we build assistants for students, we build assistants for staff. So those were instrumental in how we're delivering that value. And once we installed them on the school's website or on their phone message or their phone channels or their SMS communications, we were seeing drops of 20, 30% in call volumes coming into that school because that student was going in and chatting with that AI bot and getting the right answers. So that was an unlock for a lot of schools. They're still thinking about that. Even though we've moved on, that is still the thing that they call out the most in terms of the impact that it's making to their school. It's really simple. It's just, it's amazing how they're focusing on a tech that we had 2 years ago, but they're still thinking about that as the biggest value that's providing for them in terms of the engagement with that student at that front door. Now, you can imagine how terrible the experience of that student is if they're raving.
Absolutely. I bet. I have a senior who's going through all that right now, senior in high school. So I
That's
can
right.
imagine.
That's right.
I can imagine. One next to last question I had for you is obviously it was really fun working with you because we hadn't seen that many AI businesses that are a little later stage, right? They have revenue, they have retention rates. And in the growth equity community, everyone's been waiting to do these AI deals, right? They just haven't been at scale enough yet. In your conversations that you've been talking to investors, how could you tell the excitement level of folks around the AI in your business? Did you see that as a big differentiator in terms of how people thought about your business and wanting to invest in it? How much of a factor was that, do you think?
To be honest, I don't think a lot of people get it still. So
So not much of a factor, but they thought it was cool, is what you're saying.
look, once you go down due diligence and you go in later stages, there's other folks that you bring to the table, consulting groups and folks who understand it. But in the beginning, you just put an AI in there and it gets lost, right? Nobody really understands it because you have folks on the other side who are non-operational folks, right? That are looking at the numbers and the models and
The retention rate, the growth rate.
exactly. So it's like, well, what's the AI multiplier in that? And then you got to figure out, is this the 1.1 or is it 1.5? How real is it? And what's the impact that it's going to have on the revenue on the model going forward? And a lot of companies don't take that into account right now. So I don't know. Yes, was Element very attractive because of that? Absolutely. And once we got down to a very competitive process later on, it became really clear that Element stood out as they dug deeper into our architecture and how we're doing it. And it came back as part of that diligence. It's like, wow, you guys are really setting this stuff up in the proper way to take scale and to solve real problems with AI rather than just throwing in some pixie AI dust on top of it just so it's part of it. But it wasn't apparent before, right? You had to really dig in and have the right people on the other side.
I think that's a good point. I think what I find with a lot of founders is they're almost a little frustrated with the early tech diligence because it doesn't really seem like there is any, right? Because the
Correct.
PE
Yeah.
investors, they know there's a story behind the metrics, but the
Mhm.
metrics are the result of the story. So if you have really good retention rates, you have really good gross margin, there must be a differentiator, but they're not always the best at understanding that. And then once they bring the experts in, they understand that a little bit better. But I think that's spot on. No matter what software business, I think there's always that, do these guys really get it? And the truth is they probably don't, right? If you don't have product market
And that's
fit,
okay.
which you
Yeah.
which you clearly did,
Yep.
they're not going to help you get product market fit. They're going to help you maybe scale and grow faster. One last question for you, and you talked about this a little bit earlier. There's maybe a founder out there with a traditional vertical SaaS business, and they're trying to think about AI. How should they think about what their moats are? Like, what are the things they need to own and dominate and do really well versus what are the things they should outsource a little bit more and bring in an AI software subscription basically to pay for AI in their product? But what do they need to really own and crush to have good moats into the future, do you think?
The way that I think about it is two ways. Operationally, like how we're incorporating into our company right now to basically get that COGS down, right? That cost of delivery down. And how can we make the company more efficient? Just by implementing AI, we don't need as many developers. We can produce more stuff. We don't need as many customer success. So it's like, how do you provide the support and the company operational component? And then in the innovation side, it's like product innovation. How do you incorporate AI into your product? And when you think about that, look at your product and where you're delivering value to your customer, and if you can deliver that value faster through AI, through replacing a couple of workflows or incorporating it in part of those workflows, I feel like you have to start there rather than trying to come up with a brand new way of building something from the ground up. So slowly eroding or picking away pieces that are part of your core product, but making those changes and pushing some of that through an AI workflow, for example, right? That would be my recommendation. But the fastest way, look at the operational side first, because that's going to really get your people comfortable with, oh, I didn't think that we can actually change this workflow because I'd never used AI in this way, but now I can see how this mirrors into my customer. And then, okay, now I have an idea of how we can incorporate this into our product.
Yeah, de-risking it in a way for them, showing that it's not that risky. I think that's great.
Exactly.
Ardis, thanks so much for joining us. In today's episode, we talked a lot about your story, how you started as a traditional SaaS business almost, and then very quickly pivoted to take advantage of AI to help improve the workflows and bring costs down. We talked a little bit about the moats and then just how to frame that for investors and how much they really understand AI. But thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate the time.
Of course. It was a pleasure, Mike.
Vista Point Advisors is a founder-focused investment bank that advises software and internet founders through M&A and capital raise transactions. We are a fully unconflicted investment bank who only works for founders on the sell side, so you know that we're always representing your best interests. Securities offered through Vista Point Advisors, member FINRA, SIPC. This has been provided for informational purposes only. It is not intended to address all circumstances that might arise. Testimonials from past clients may not be representative of the experience of other clients, and there is no guarantee of future performance or success. Clients are not compensated for their comments. If you have any questions about the process of selling your business or raising capital, reach out to a member of our team, or check out the For Founders section of our site by visiting forfounders.guide.